class, Mr. Rasmussen here. This is lesson 14A. This is the very beginning of our unit on muscles. In this unit, or in this lesson, I want to give just a short introduction into muscles. So this lesson is titled Muscle Introduction. Today we are going to lay the foundation of some important concepts that will carry throughout the rest of this muscle unit. So there are, in our body, in our anatomy, there are three types of muscles that we will encounter. So your body has three essential types of muscles. The first type is smooth muscle. And if we're going to look for this muscle within our body, we would typically find it as part of our circulatory system. And the main part of our circulatory system that we'd find it in is that tunica media, that part of smooth muscle inside of our veins and arteries. And another place we'd find a lot of this smooth muscle is in our digestive system. It helps with peristalsis, or pushing the food down our digestive tract. And it's also going to help our stomach mix up our stomach contents. So those are the places where we typically find it in our body. And the big thing about smooth muscle is it's involuntary. It's not the type of muscle that we're going to be able to control. So for instance, we can't tell our body to constrict the blood vessels in our arms. I can't say, close my blood vessels, close my blood vessels. It doesn't work. They're involuntary. It happens because of that parasympathetic or sympathetic response that we learned about last chapter. So those types of muscles controlled by the parasympathetic or sympathetic nervous system end up being these involuntary smooth muscles. And if we take a look at these smooth muscles under the microscope, this is what we're going to see. They are, each little muscle cell has its own nucleus. So each muscle cell contains its own nucleus, and there are these little white areas here are the muscle cells, and they're all tightly packed together, and they make up the smooth muscle. The another type is skeletal muscle. This is the biggest primary muscle in our body. Most of our body is skeletal muscles, and they're going to end up moving our skeletal system. So if we take a look here, our arm here, these muscles here, our deltoids and triceps and biceps here, those are skeletal muscles. And we can look at that's what skeletal muscle looks like. They're these long fibers, and they're striated. They have lines dividing them, or striations. And these types of muscles are voluntary. It means if I want to move my arm, I can control these muscles and move them however I want to. So these we get to control. They're voluntary. And the primary thing that skeletal muscles do, where they get their name, is they're going to move bones. So if we were to take a look at these skeletal muscle fibers under the microscope, we would notice that they look a little different. They're, instead of little single cells, they're these long bands of muscles, and they're multinucleated. So one muscle cell could contain many nucleuses, so multinucleated, and they have striations, or as we can look at this, they have lines, and these lines sort of run, I'll go back here. These lines kind of run in this direction here. We can see all these little lines. Those are the striations of the skeletal muscle. Okay, and the last type, I told her there's three, so we had smooth muscle, skeletal muscle, and the last type is cardiac muscle, and cardiac muscle actually looks different than the rest of the muscles. And you probably have guessed it, cardiac muscle is involuntary, again, and it's primarily found in the heart. That's why we get the name cardiac. So the muscle that lines your heart, the muscle that allows the ventricles to contract and the atria to contract, these are going to be cardiac muscles. And once again, they're involuntary. You don't get to tell your heart to speed up or slow down at will. It does it depending upon what sort of stimulus is put upon you. So it's involuntary, it's found in the heart. It actually looks like this. It's multinucleated as well, and it has branches. So it's sort of branched here. So it looks kind of like skeletal muscle, a lot closer to skeletal muscle than it does to smooth muscle, but yet it's different. Okay. Antagonistic pairs of muscles. So here's a huge concept in muscle anatomy, in talking about muscles and how muscles work. Muscles work as what we call antagonistic pairs. So if I'm going to look at this region where he's obviously in some pain here, in this region where we have our triceps and biceps, I'm going to look at that region of our arm. And what's actually going on there is this. There are two muscles. There's a bicep muscle. Over here, here's our bicep muscle. And on the back side, here's our triceps muscle. Right? And what muscles do, when muscles contract, they get shorter. So that's all they do. Muscles only get shorter. So when they contract, they shorten. When they relax, they can stretch out, but when they contract, they shorten. So right here, as this biceps muscle contracts or pulls this way, it's going to shorten. Okay? What's going to happen is it's going to pull, so the bone that it inserts on is the radius. It's going to pull the radius in this direction. Okay? But this muscle, the triceps muscle, when it shortens this way, it's actually going to pull the ulna, what is the bone it inserts on, it's going to pull the ulna in this direction. So take a look at that. These two muscles work against each other. They're what we call antagonistic. They work in opposite directions. So as the biceps muscle contracts, the triceps muscle has to relax in order for this muscle to move in this direction. In order for the muscle to move in this direction, the triceps muscle has to contract, but the biceps has to relax. That's why we call them antagonistic. They work against each other. So these two muscles work against each other. Now, one thing that brings up interestingly is when we flex our muscles, what we're actually doing is we're contracting both muscles at the same time. That's why when we're flexing, this bone stays in place. So the bone's not moving, but both sets of muscles are working at the same time, and they're working against each other. One of them's pulling the bone this way, one of them's pulling the bone this way, and they're both pulling really hard, but the bone's not moving. So that's why it's antagonistic. Okay, some important terms I want you to know for the rest of this unit. And these we'll talk about. You'll hear these when we look at our muscles a lot, when we're doing the cat dissection and looking at human muscles. They'll use these in the terms or in the names of the muscles, so I want you to kind of understand them. The first one is a flexor. And a flexor, very simply, a flexor is going to bend a joint. So right here, here's the same muscles, the biceps and the triceps. The biceps are a flexor. They're going to cause this joint to bend. Okay? So flexors bend joints. The opposite of a flexor is called an extensor, and an extensor extends a limb or straightens a joint. So this one, the triceps, are an extensor muscle. They're going to cause this part of your arm to become extended. Okay, so flexors and extensors. The next two important terms, if, say for instance, let's take a little aside here. Say for instance you were out for a nice walk and out of nowhere a spaceship came down and took you away to their home planet of Snorglepuff or wherever they are from. Here's their planet. They got little people on them. Oops, they have long-legged people. If they take you away from your home, a term that's really familiar with that is abduction. So you've been abducted by aliens. And that means, simply enough, you were taken away. We're going to use that same term in a different context. So if we look at this, abduction is a muscle that, abduction is a muscle that pulls the limb away from the body. So abduction, so an abductor muscle is going to pull the limb away from the body, Adduction is the opposite. Adduction pulls it towards. So an adductor muscle is going to pull the muscle towards the body, but an abductor muscle is going to pull the limb away from the body. Just like aliens pull you away from your homes, not really, but at least in movies they do. An adduction going to pull you towards the body. So make sure you know those important terms. That is the introduction of our muscle unit. Class, if you have any questions, I'm here for you. Feel free to ask me in the beginning of class. Have a good day. Bye.